First comment gets a shout out next video.
The Diddy thing was like an Epstein-type compromise deal, where he had, whether he was doing it himself, conceivably, people want to think that he's attached to some intelligence agency or something like that. I think he's a gangster who made $1 billion and knew how to control people by compromising them. That's what I think. Whether or not he had help, I don't know. Whether or not he shared some of that information with people so they knew they had compromising stuff on people, I don't know. But clearly he was doing it for his own jollies too. There was something sick about it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that people in the music and entertainment industry had to know that Diddy was like abusing, kids basically. And yet they still fed him kids. And like, where's the accountability?
There had to be rumors. There had to be.
They had to know.
Yeah.
They had to know.
Cat Williams is talking about it on.
Exactly.
Yeah, on that podcast.
But like who's feeding him the kids,
Right. Yeah. And what videos do they have of these people where they're willing to defend him, when they're willing to keep quiet about all this? Like how many people were compromised?
Yeah.
The whole thing is crazy.
Crazy.
It's just crazy when because the nutty conspiracy theories is like, oh, there's a bunch of pedophiles in Hollywood. And you're like, come on, that sounds too kooky. And then you see like the Nickelodeon thing and all these.
For years, the public story has been simple. Sean Diddy Combs was the boss. The gatekeeper. The man at the top of the music world who decided who made it and who didn't. When his name showed up in headlines, people assumed the story ended there. One powerful man. One center of gravity. One problem. But what if that belief is exactly what keeps the real story hidden? The moment this narrative began to shift didn't come from a courtroom or a leaked document. It came from reactions. From silences. From the way certain powerful people avoided saying anything at all, while others hinted that Diddy was never acting alone. That he explained too much. That he took up too much space. And that in systems built on control, the most visible figure is rarely the most powerful. The video that sparked this conversation doesn't claim secret meetings or signed conspiracies. It doesn't offer proof of crimes committed by unseen hands. Instead, it points to something more unsettling: patterns. The same names appearing around the same moments. The same outcomes repeating across decades. Artists rising fast, then disappearing. Allegations surfacing, then dissolving into silence. Careers surviving storms that should have ended them. Elon Musk never named a villain. He didn't need to. His reactions, his timing, and his visible discomfort around certain cultural power structures were enough to make people pay attention. 50 Cent, on the other hand, has been warning for years. Not about one man, but about an industry that rewards obedience and punishes curiosity. An industry where influence matters more than talent, and silence is often the price of survival. As Diddy's public image began to fracture, a dangerous question emerged. If he was truly the one in charge, why did so many people seem untouched by the fallout? Why did the spotlight stop so neatly at one name? And why did conversations about deeper power structures suddenly feel off limits? This isn't a story about guilt. It's a story about insulation. About how systems protect themselves by offering a face to blame, while the structure behind that face remains intact. When attention locks onto one figure, it stops searching elsewhere. And in worlds built on influence, that distraction can be the most effective shield of all. Because if Diddy is the story, the system survives. But if Diddy is the distraction, then the real story has been hiding in plain sight all along. If this already feels bigger than one man, leave a like so more people hear it. Say what you think in the comments, even if you're unsure. And subscribe, because next we look at how silence is built, rewarded, and enforced. The idea of hidden power only works if silence is enforced. And in this world, silence doesn't happen by accident. It's trained. Rewarded. Sometimes feared into existence. Long before Diddy became the headline, the industry already had rules. Unwritten ones. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. You don't question how deals really get made. And you never confuse visibility with control. Those who followed the rules rose quickly. Those who didn't often stalled, vanished, or became cautionary tales whispered about years later. The video points out something unsettling. Whenever controversy surrounded Diddy, the damage seemed carefully contained. Stories flared up, then cooled. Accusations surfaced, then dissolved into legal language, NDAs, or sudden distractions. Meanwhile, other figures, far more insulated, far less exposed, remained untouched. Not criticized. Not questioned. Almost never named. This is where the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Jay-Z, Beyoncé, Oprah, Bishop T.D. Jakes. These names are not accused of crimes in the video. That matters. What's questioned instead is influence. Cultural authority. The ability to shape narratives, elevate voices, and quietly close doors. When someone reaches that level, they no longer need to act directly. Systems move for them. 50 Cent has hinted at this dynamic for years. Not with documents or courtroom filings, but with experience. He's watched artists lose leverage overnight. He's seen loyalty rewarded in ways money can't explain. And he's openly mocked the idea that the industry's power structure begins and ends with one man. In his view, Diddy wasn't the architect. He was a manager. A visible operator in a much larger machine. Elon Musk's involvement adds another layer. He exists outside the music industry, yet his reactions suggest recognition. When someone with nothing to gain looks uneasy, people notice. Musk didn't confirm theories. He didn't deny them either. He simply reacted in ways that suggested familiarity with how powerful systems protect themselves, by offering the public something easy to focus on. The video makes a crucial point here. Power prefers distance. The closer someone is to controversy, the less powerful they often are. True influence operates quietly, through institutions, partnerships, philanthropy, and reputation. It doesn't argue. It doesn't defend. It waits. And that's where Diddy's role becomes clearer. If attention stays on him, it never reaches the structure behind him. The deals. The alliances. The long-standing relationships that don't end when one person falls out of favor. A system doesn't collapse because one figure is removed. It simply adjusts. Which raises a far more uncomfortable question. If Diddy was allowed to fall, who was important enough to make sure the system didn't? If this chapter changed how you see power and visibility, like the video so it reaches people who still think the story is simple. Comment if you've noticed these patterns before, even in other industries. And subscribe if you want to catch the details that usually get ignored.
How does Jay-Z sit down with Gayle King and she not ask him one question about the intersection between him and Aaliyah and Robert Kelly? This is insane that people keep refusing. I've been screaming, not just Diddy, but Diddy and Jay-Z are monsters. Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, Robert Kelly, Sean Combs have one person in common, professionally and privately. Sean Carter. This has been a fist of tyranny that has been punching through. That changes now, Sean. You have no choice. That Dream Hampton was being financed and ran by Sean Carter. They were able to go and get all of these witnesses because he was there with Robert Kelly.
The deeper this story goes, the clearer one thing becomes: systems like this don't survive on loyalty alone. They survive on leverage. According to the patterns laid out in the video, power in this world isn't enforced loudly. There are no public threats. No dramatic ultimatums. Instead, control is exercised quietly, through access. Who gets invited into rooms where decisions are made? Who gets funding? Who gets protection when controversy hits? And just as important, who suddenly doesn't? Artists and insiders who tried to speak out often described the same experience. Phones stopped ringing. Opportunities dried up. Support vanished without explanation. Nothing overt enough to point to a single culprit, but consistent enough to send a message. You can say whatever you want. Just understand what it will cost you. This is where the idea of a hidden boss starts to make sense, not as a single mastermind, but as a network. A structure where influence flows upward, while risk flows downward. Diddy, in this framing, wasn't untouchable. He was exposed. He took meetings. He made deals face to face. And when things went wrong, his name was the one the public already knew. The video highlights how investigations, formal or informal, often stalled at the same point. Questions were redirected. Stories reframed. Attention shifted. Media cycles moved on. And behind it all was a familiar strategy: isolate the controversy to one individual, then let time do the rest. The system doesn't fight back. It waits until the noise fades. What's striking is how effective this approach has been. Even as allegations and controversies resurfaced over the years, very few conversations ever expanded outward. The focus stayed narrow. The narrative stayed simple. And simplicity, in a complex power structure, is protection. Elon Musk's role here isn't as an investigator, but as an observer who recognizes the shape of power. In tech, in politics, in finance, the same rules apply. The most visible figure absorbs the blame, while the structure that enabled them continues untouched. Musk didn't spell this out. He didn't have to. His reaction suggested recognition rather than surprise. 50 Cent's warnings fit neatly into this picture. He's not claiming secret files or hidden crimes. He's pointing to survival tactics. To what happens when you understand how power actually works, and adjust accordingly. In his view, staying alive in these systems means knowing when not to ask certain questions. By the time Diddy's public image began to collapse, the machine behind him was already insulated. Deals didn't unravel. Institutions didn't shake. Influence didn't disappear. It simply rerouted. And that's the most unsettling part. Because when an investigation seems to end cleanly, when the damage feels contained, it doesn't always mean the truth was uncovered. Sometimes it means the boundaries were enforced exactly as designed. If this chapter helped you see how control operates quietly, hit like so this conversation keeps going. Drop a comment if you've seen this kind of silence play out elsewhere. And subscribe, because next, we look at what happens when the system finally slips, and the damage can't be contained anymore. By the time public attention finally locked onto Diddy, the system around him was already shifting into defense mode. Not panicking. Not collapsing. Adjusting. That's how long-standing power structures survive pressure. They narrow the focus and control the damage. There was no single investigation that blew this open. No dramatic raid or unsealed indictment tied to a broader network. Instead, there was fragmentation. Stories were handled one at a time. Allegations were addressed individually. Each situation treated as isolated, unrelated, and self-contained. That approach matters, because when events are separated, patterns disappear. The video makes an important distinction here.
How did you get that footage of Diddy?
I figured most journalists would not disclose their sources.
Does he know y'all have this in the doc?
I would doubt he knows.
So when this airs, that'll be the first time that his legal team, Diddy, that everybody knows that this footage is now seeing the light of day. Perhaps.
This isn't about proving a hidden criminal conspiracy. It's about observing how accountability behaves when power is involved. When allegations surfaced, responses were swift but contained. Lawyers stepped in. Statements were released. Narratives were reframed. And just as quickly as the outrage peaked, it began to cool. Meanwhile, institutions connected to the broader culture, media outlets, brands, partnerships, rarely widened the scope. They focused on what was safe to report. What could be verified? What wouldn't invite legal risk? And in doing so, they unintentionally reinforced the same structure critics were pointing to. One name. One story. One fall. The legal reality is important here. As of now, many claims remain allegations. Some matters are unresolved. Others have been settled quietly or remain outside criminal court entirely. That distinction protects everyone involved from reckless conclusions. But it also creates space where uncomfortable questions can be avoided without being answered. What's notable is what didn't happen. There was no sweeping reassessment of the industry. No broad examination of how power circulates, who benefits from silence, or why certain figures seem permanently insulated. The conversation stopped where it was safest to stop. And that may be the clearest signal of all. In systems like this, justice doesn't always fail loudly. Sometimes it simply narrows its scope. Responsibility is individualized. Context is minimized. And the larger structure continues, unchanged, because it was never formally challenged. The video argues that Diddy's situation represents a pressure test. Not of one man's behavior, but of how much scrutiny the system itself can absorb before redirecting it. So far, that redirection has worked. The spotlight burned hot, but not wide. And yet, cracks have started to show. More people are asking different questions now. Not just what happened, but how it was allowed to happen for so long. Not just who acted, but who benefited from looking away. Because once you start asking those questions, the story stops being about a single figure. It becomes about design. About incentives. About who the system protects when everything is on the line. And that's where the next chapter takes us. If this chapter made you rethink what accountability actually looks like, leave a like so this conversation reaches further. Comment if you believe the focus has been intentionally narrowed. And subscribe, because in the final chapter, we look at what all of this means for the people left behind, and why the fallout may not be over yet. When stories like this finally slow down, attention usually moves on. Headlines fade. New scandals take their place. But the real consequences don't disappear with the news cycle. They settle quietly, with the people who never had the power to control the narrative in the first place. Behind every protected system are artists who lost momentum, careers that stalled without explanation, and voices that learned the cost of speaking too loudly. Some walked away on their own. Others were pushed out so subtly it took years to realize what had happened. No press releases. No public feuds. Just absence. And absence, in an industry built on visibility, is its own kind of sentence. The video ends on a sobering realization. Whether Diddy is guilty of everything alleged, some of it, or none of it at all, the structure that allowed so much to remain unchallenged is still standing. Power didn't disappear. It redistributed. Influence didn't collapse. It adapted. That's how systems survive scrutiny, by sacrificing what's visible to protect what isn't. There is no clean ending here. No final verdict that explains everything. Just a clearer view of how control actually works. Loud enough to shape culture. Quiet enough to avoid responsibility. And effective enough that most people never notice it happening. What Elon Musk and 50 Cent ultimately point to isn't a hidden villain pulling every string. It's something more uncomfortable than that. A reality where power is shared, normalized, and rarely questioned once it reaches a certain level. Where silence isn't forced, it's incentivized. And where the biggest threat isn't exposure, but indifference. The most haunting part of this story isn't what's been revealed. It's what still hasn't been examined. The relationships that remain intact. The institutions that never had to answer questions. The people who benefited from the distraction while the spotlight stayed fixed on one name. Because if Diddy truly was the end of the story, the fallout would feel final by now. And it doesn't. So here's the question that lingers long after the video ends. If one man was enough to protect the system, Who was the system really built for? If this series made you see the story differently, like the video so it reaches people who still think it's simple. Share it with someone who questions narratives the moment they feel too clean. And subscribe, because Crime Decoder is about following patterns, not headlines, and there are many more stories like this hiding in plain sight.